the next thing I want to talk about is this Emerson poll. So the Emerson poll that I was just talking to you about is very interesting because it does indeed have Bernie Sanders at 29%, which means he is the front runner. And this is a national poll. So it's a little bit different than some of the other polls that have been released. This is a national poll. Bernie is solidly in first place. But they have Biden at 24%. And I just cannot take a poll seriously. Even though Emerson, once again, in all fairness, has been one of the fairer of the polls. It's been one of the more legitimate of the polls. Now, just because you're more legitimate, just because you're a little bit better, doesn't mean that you're actually legitimate. Okay? It doesn't mean that you're 100% accurate. Here's why I say that. Once again, this poll has a 5.2% margin of error. Now you can look this up yourself. I took polling analysis classes when I was in college. Obviously I study polls a lot by nature of being involved in this particular, this particular job. Like we're looking at polls all day. And half the time I'm trying to debunk the polls. So, but if you're going to claim a poll is legitimate, you cannot have a 5.2% margin of error. The most that you can have, the norm is 4%. And that's a lot, first of all. Like, that's still a lot. 5.2%? So basically what they're saying is Biden could technically be ahead of Sanders. We don't know. And the next Pete Buttigieg, Beto O'Rourke, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, and even Julian Castro and Andrew Yang, all of their positions are interchangeable in the polls based off of a 5.2% margin of error. Also, it's very hard for me to take a poll seriously when you include a candidate that hasn't announced, in other words, Joe Biden, when you include a candidate that hasn't announced, when every other candidate that you have named in the polls has announced, how much sense does that make? Don't you think the results are going to be skewed just a little bit? Just a little bit. Now, here's another problem I have with this poll. I believe that Andrew Yang has 3%. Congratulations to him for improving in the polls. But this is why I say you have to mind that margin of error, that 5.2% margin of error. It says Julian Castro has 3%. It says Amy Klobuchar, it says Tulsi Gabbard has 1%. That's what it says. Julian Castro, who literally is never on anything ever, name the last time you saw a headline from Julian Castro. You tell me. Let me know what. I know what the answer is. You don't even remember the last time you saw a headline from Julian Castro. You probably saw it here. That's probably the last time you've seen a headline about Julian Castro, but somehow he has 3%. Tulsi has 1%. And although that is an improvement, and although that is good, because that does make sure she get on the debate stage. People, Julian Castro only has 52,000 donations. Julian Castro supposedly has 3% of the national vote. But Tulsi has over 65,000, well over that at this point. So if Julian Castro has 52,000 donors, and this is as of yesterday, Tulsi has more than that, set by maybe 20,000, if not more at this point. What the hell methods are you using to decide whether or not your poll should be published? Because a big hole in your plan, something that, in my opinion, should make you question, maybe we need to reconduct this poll, is when the candidate that has already qualified for the debate stage via individual donations, the candidate who brings bigger crowds in big cities than Julian Castro, for example, when she isn't polling higher than the people who haven't even qualified for the debate stage, how can I take this poll seriously? How can I take this poll as legitimate? I get it. Polls they do show some reflection of what the numbers look like. But once again, people, Tulsi got at least 200 donations from 20 states. At least. That was done actually around the $20,000 donation mark, rough, according to the campaign. She's over 65,000, well over that at this point. And yet, this Emerson poll, which is being used now to determine, who's more popular, who isn't, who has a chance to run, who hasn't. How can this Emerson poll say somebody like Julian Castro is polling ahead of Tulsi Gabbard? This poll, they're both tied at 1%, but the poll is actually saying, and I'm not joking, it's saying that even though they're both at 1%, Mike Gravel, because everybody's been getting on to me about pronouncing his name wrong. His name is Gravel, not Gravel. He's doing better than Tulsi in the polls, according to this poll. The guy who actually endorsed Tulsi is doing better than Tulsi in the polls. Both at 1%, but Mike Gravel has a higher, he has more people who said that they were going to vote for him supposedly than Tulsi in the polls. Now, I might be going out on a limb here, and I don't necessarily think that everybody involved in I don't think that everybody in Emerson who conducted this poll is involved in some crazy conspiracy. It just takes one person. But do you think they may be lying about Tulsi Gabbard's poll numbers now? I've been talking about this for how long? Seriously. When are people going to start waking up? Because here's the messed up part. It would be, they could very well, all the other numbers could very well be accurate, right? So Bernie could very well be at 29%. That makes perfect sense. Joe Biden could very well be at 24%. That does, unfortunately, make sense because, well, he hasn't opened his mouth too much, but I imagine as he begins to open his mouth more, those numbers are going to drop like they have every other time Joe Biden has run. But that still makes somewhat sense given where we're at right now, right? Okay, cool. But how are you going to say that Julian Castro is doing better? Is it too outlandish to believe, potentially, that they literally went out of their way to isolate Tulsi Gabbard? Because I've already told you where I stand. Tulsi Gabbard is 100% the biggest threat to the establishment the biggest threat that they've ever seen. And they know it. And they feel it. Listen, if you need proof, once again, Tulsi Gabbard literally called Trump a bitch on Twitter. Trump attacks every and anybody. People could say, well, maybe he didn't notice. Yeah, okay, that thing got like 180,000 likes and 100,000 retweets. Something like that. So Trump noticed. Come on, let's be honest. But Trump didn't respond. Why? Because he doesn't want Tulsi airing out his dirty laundry. Ryan Chan. I was curious I wasn't sure if you knew, but Buttigieg ran for the DNC chair. He talked about the people should get over the 2016 conflict in the DNC chair debate. Well, not that I was going to vote for him, but that just adds to the list of reasons I would never vote for him. But considering that Tulsi Gabbard is the biggest threat to the establishment, would it be outlandish for Tulsi to be isolated and for them to lie about her numbers? Because even if we're going to talk about, for example, Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang is kind of in the same niche as Tulsi. They both occupy primarily an online space. They're both kind of seen as outsiders. Tulsi has a little bit more clout. There is a small difference. Andrew Yang hasn't been constantly berated with negative attacks by the Democratic establishment. But he does occupy an online space very similar to Tulsi. They campaign in the same states. But the difference is Tulsi has had a significant following way before Andrew Yang. I mean, Tulsi's forever associated with one of the most popular campaigns and one of the most popular politicians in history. Tulsi's videos, on average, on Twitter and things like that, and on Facebook, do far better than Andrew Yang's. And this is not to throw shade at Yang, this is just trying to draw a point. Tulsi has way more followers than Andrew Yang. For the most part, Tulsi is doing better in every single way. And yet, this poll is somehow concluding, yeah, Andrew Yang is more popular. Even if by 2%, I just feel like it further validates the possibility that they isolated Tulsi as a variable and then lied about her numbers, hoping that people wouldn't go back and look at the discrepancies, like the 5.1% margin. Because you know what that means, people? If there's a 5.2% margin of error, Tulsi could be at 1% or Tulsi could be at 7%. What the fuck kind of margin of error is that? Like I said, 4 is the most you're going to have on a given poll that's taken seriously. But 5.2%, and then on top of that, once again, there are candidates who haven't even qualified for the debate stage that are supposedly polling better than the person who has qualified for the debate stage. There are candidates who haven't even had a platform like Tulsi, right? So Tulsi's been on CNN, she's been on MSNBC, she's been on independent media. Tulsi has been on Joe Rogan, my show, Jimmy Dore show, TYT, the list goes on. Julian Castro's never been on any of those shows except for CNN. Thanks for watching that segment of Mikai Says Sukasa. Don't forget to join us on Roku and catch our Roku exclusives. Also, help us reach our goal of 500 patrons on Patreon. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and justinform.com. But more than anything else, always remember, find your balance. Peace.